You're so soft and round and gooey. Make your form. Find your
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Keith and Mike Watch Deep Space Nine, your most uncomfortable Star Trek podcast. We're very happy to have you with us here today. We are talking about Season 5, Episode 12, The Begotten. Mike, I hope at the end of this you'll tag that entire experience for everyone. How's it going, buddy?
I hope that intro is forgotten. If you know what I'm saying? It's going well, Keith. Big news this week. Then we'll jump right into it. This is a milestone because during the watch-along, Keith, which happened mere hour and a half ago.
Okay.
I can say that this is the first Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode to make me fully cry on camera.
I thought it might.
So there's that. You can check that out on the Patreon page. I'm sorry I couldn't get a stream this week, folks, but for those of you who are patrons who would like to become patrons, that watch-along is now up on the feed.
Yes, at patreon.com/K&M. And for sure, I definitely cried at the end too, but I definitely thought of you all through this episode. So,
was not ready for it.
No. And you know what? And on some level, I think it's probably better that you watch that by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes it works. Sometimes it's better to have a whole...
Not very talkative, I'll say. I was locked in from the get, so...
It's really, really awesome. So, but before we talk about The Begotten, we have to talk about the darkness and the light. We had a really long and complex conversation about that episode last week. If you missed it, check it out in the feed. And it solicited a whole bunch of really interesting comments and thoughts, and we got emails, we got posts on the
because
YouTube
it's a segment
here.
Now we're gonna need a bumper, and so as we'll give you a makeshift. Before we start the day, let's all hear what you had to say. We'll have to work on that, but it'll do for now. Not really nailing it today, Mike.
We'll have to work on it, but it's good enough for now, but it's not really doing it. Or Keith and Mike watch Deep Space Nine. We'll keep workshopping until the finale
here's
of the
the
show.
Part of the episode which we're reaching at, let's see, 3 minutes, is where Mike goes, should we just start over?
Oh, no, we only start over when I'm the idiot.
When you blue screen.
When I blue screen. Yes, no, we are here. We're going to sit in this. We're going to allow it to be. We're going to sink into it like it's a goo baby. All right, so here is what you had to say about the darkness and the light from our patrons. If you want me to read your comment, just join our Patreon at patreon.com/K&M or leave a super thanks right here on the episode. And so here's what the patrons had to say. Joshua Cronin says, great conversation today. I've said it before, I'll say it again. No Star Trek gets as close to the amazing storytelling that Deep Space Nine does. This episode pulls at the strings so much, and it's a good thing. See, I knew, see?
It was about to come out. The words are about to come out through the lips.
It happened. It's amazing. I'm glad you both enjoyed it as much as I do. I give it a firm 92 self-sealing stem bolts, and boy, am I excited for Mike to watch next week's episode, The Begotten. I think all of us who know Mike and this episode, we're excited to have Mike see it. YouTube viewer says, in case you film the next episode early, which we didn't, but always good to get those comments in early because you never know what we're going to do. He says 81 out of 100 self-sealing stem bolts, good, but not great. Kira is the number 2 officer on Deep Space Nine. She can override Odo's protocols. And we were talking about how did she get Odo's data, and that actually is a really good point. And of course she could. Also, the passwords are bad on Star Trek. Odo could have made a code to lock her out, but that would probably be against regulations. I think if they didn't make the villain a goofy cross between a 90s horror movie character and an opera villain, I might have taken his side. Kira had no qualms about causing collateral damage, and she never recants. Arguably, she doubles down on it. Agreed. Mike is right. Neither side is entirely right or entirely wrong. I don't agree that innocence is an excuse for the guilty. Mike was wrong that Kira knowing the sedative wouldn't work as a wormhole. They made a whole scene where they explained that the herbs were counteracting the sleep aid sedative that Bashir gave her. And you're right. And YouTuber also continues talking about the culpability of either side in this conflict. It says in the 1930s, the Nazis won the plurality of votes, but not the majority. They managed to take over anyway. You still wonder how complicit the German population as a whole was with the evils of the National Socialists. In a lot of ways, they were victims and collaborators. Mm-hmm. And they go on to do a couple of other examples. And I think that is kind of the heart of what Kira's point is and what we're all sort of debating, and that the culpability is, it's not black and white, it's gray, it's a sliding scale, it's super, super complex, and you can't just knock it down as simple as yes or no. And I think a lot of people commented to that point, and there's some great comments on there that I'm not going to read. Mm-hmm. So there's some new folks who haven't commented before, some great stuff there. So definitely go read the comments, especially stuff like this. Songbird3411 has some really interesting things to say. Anyway, we continue the conversation. As far as
Keith,
the last
can I interject quickly?
Yeah, please.
Just as kind of an addendum to last week, because I've continued to think about this, especially as I was reading a lot of the comments. And what I find interesting in my experience, let me speak for myself. Things don't always balance out the way they should, right? So, you bring up that what I think this episode shows us, and what the occupation talks about, which I appreciate, is that often when we're talking about this collateral damage, it's easier to accept the sort of ubiquitous violence when you're looking through the lens of the oppressed. Like in this case, the Bajorans are the oppressed, right? And so it's easier to buy them as having to do what they have to do, right? As seeing all the Cardassians as bad.
Yeah.
Just like if you want to go to the 1930s analogy, it's easier to understand the Jews and those being oppressed as the ones to, of course they would hate all Germans. I mean, it's harder for them to cut out the good ones, right? But that's not to say that all the German population were bad, right? Well, you just don't often view through their lens.
And that's where you get to different levels of culpability. Mm-hmm. And like, what are, let's say a certain person is elected in our country, mm-hmm. and starts doing horrible things. Well, I sure as hell didn't vote for him. Mm-hmm. I've been fighting against him for forever, but I'm still an American, and if mm-hmm. America is doing crappy things, what is my level of culpability? What is my level of responsibility?
Let's carve up that point a little more.
Am I supposed to go out and die fighting an impossible cause because it's the right thing? I don't know. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not.
Let's do the slippery slope. Look at American politics. I won't even get into the weeds of it. It's exhausting. It's terrifying. It's all of the things, right? It would be hard to vilify a human being for saying, you know what, I want no part of this. I'm not listening, I'm not watching, I'm not voting. And then, let's say a terrible person is elected, and you didn't put your voice in dissent. What's your level of culpability?
Well, and so, which is why I think it's a sliding scale. Mm-hmm. And that you, at some point, you do become you are culpable due to your inaction. As much as your actions sometimes, and that there are actions that you sort of must take, and there are actions that, like, maybe you're okay if you don't take, should I die to protect something? No. But if I see someone on the street being attacked, do I have some culpability to do something? Yes. And I think, anyway, Point being, it is
Complicated.
incredibly complicated, and I don't think there are any absolutely right or wrong answers.
Or
but
satisfying answers. That's the trickier part.
Yeah, satisfying. I think that's the better way of putting it. Like, there are right and wrong answers, but there just aren't satisfying answers.
It's funny because as a kid, to kind of flip this back to watching TV, which is what ultimately this podcast is about. As a kid and even as a teen or adolescent, really, I enjoyed things where things were more black and white, right? Where there was a satisfying you felt like there was some justice.
It's Star Wars as opposed to Star Trek.
And as an adult, I find that I enjoy the more complicated, less resolved endings a little bit more, or at least I make space for them more.
It feels more like the world that we experience.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas as a child, we experience things in black and white, in yes and no, in good and bad. And so, of course, we gravitate to storytelling that works that way.
It's tough to do endings like that, right? Because a lot of times when you feel cheated at the end, where you feel like that was a cop-out, they didn't give me... There's a difference between what would you do, the question at the end of a piece of a work of art, or we chickened out. It's a fine line, but there is a difference.
Well, exactly, which is why I don't think it was a cop-out. I think it was a truth out. It was like, yep, the truth is hard. Truth is complicated.
All right, back to what they said. It isn't what Mike thinks after the fact.
Yeah, we'll talk for 90 minutes later. Mm-hmm. So JD says, as far as the last episode and how I reacted as a religious kid, it felt to me, because we asked about that, it felt to me like God was trying to use Star Trek to communicate prophetically with me. Go ahead and laugh, I do. And I know now that I was in a cult, and I was full tilt. I didn't just have to deconstruct, there was things I had to trash and burn from my youth. I think that's true of a lot of us. It set me back a lot socially. Keith, if you had met me when I was 16, you would have thought I was cool ass as long as we talked about Trek. But as soon as I started talking about God communicating through the prophets, when you realized I didn't mean the Bajorans, you'd have run. I mean, honestly, like, I did not have a religious background, but my sort of thought processes was every bit as rigid. Mm-hmm. At that point, you probably would have thought I was a lunatic too.
And we all do our own deprogramming, right? As we get older.
Yep. Yeah. And if you don't, then you got problems. There's an episode in season 7 I need you to do entirely in Muppet voices. I forgot that we went on a Muppet runner until I just read that.
I still forget. I don't remember doing it. So great.
Because you try to repress trauma. Let's be fair, while this is a great episode, I think its current prescience is affecting our view. Very interesting. But it deserves 90 self-sealing stem bolts. Harry Pothead says, I give this one 85 stem bolts. It's a good episode. It's exciting. It sucks that we lost Pharrell and Lupisa. They were used to make it real for the audience. I have taken Kira's speech about the darkness and light and innocent being an excuse to mean that she could only be what she was because of the darkness of the Cardassian occupation, and that this Cardassian was using the death of innocent people to excuse becoming a killer he wanted to be.
I like that.
Wanted to be. It's a very interesting point. Yeah, I mean, the justifications of using a true and rational justification to do something terrible you want to do for your own purposes is a whole nother layer of complexity. Right. Wow, cool. Anyway, Kevin Miles says, terrorist versus freedom fighter. Kira thinks of herself and her group as freedom fighters, whereas Cardassians consider them terrorists. Both are correct and both are wrong. Yeah, exactly. It depends on which side of the war you are on. Deep Space Nine has many continuous story arcs running throughout the series. The Ferengi story arc, the Dominion story arc, Kira's freedom fighter history story arc, etc. Kira's belief that she was right for what she did during the war haunts her, but she would do it all again. Her past will play a major part as the series progresses. If you watch only the episodes that deal with her past and her importance in season 7, it is a fantastic story. Though only one thing could have made it better is Nog's growth and development. I really enjoyed your synopsis at the end. You guys really got the essence of the story and the series as a whole. Like Mike, I give this 94 self-sealing stem bolts. I appreciate you reading my comments, even though I am not a patron at the present time. Thank you. I don't always check. I just remember you're a patron. So you're welcome.
Hey man, we always say you can pip in, pip out as necessary. It's
100%.
Totally
100%. We're all in the family.
Yep.
James Hubbard says 95 stem bolts. This is one of my top 5 rewatched episodes, if not top 5 favorite. The writing, acting, and the camera work are top notch. I also like to throw out a shout out to where was it? Oh, Kalan and Kamor, also on YouTube, who makes an incredible point about Kira choosing to go out and risk her life even though she was pregnant, and pointing out the privilege of sort of assuming that you have a choice between protecting the baby and yourself, and like you know, a lot of pregnant women have to defend themselves and the baby at the same time. Like how would we, you know, like she would assume that we're both gonna die or we're gonna fight, and I think that there's she put it much, or they put it much better. Go read that comment. I thought it was really smart. Anyway, Hibernation Pod says, I love it when the episode can get you both talking about the deep stuff and the horrors of real life, even if only briefly or vaguely touched upon. It is like Keith said, it is too bad there isn't more time for this episode. Still a good one. It is not one that I ever remember either for some odd reason. I think in this case, as I watched this podcast of it first and really liked the discussion, I will base my rating on the talk that was produced out of it. I agree with Mike, we should not look away. As absurd as it sounds, I do take sides and I do not take sides. It is just so simple it just isn't so simple for various reasons. We can go on, and the discussion likely may never end. I don't think it ever will end. For an episode I never remember, I might never forget from here on in. Oh, I like that. Deep Space Nine all around means so much more to me now than it ever did. I can't imagine what it will feel like 10 years from now. And so I asked, what did you feel about this episode when you were a kid? What do you feel about it now? Which I think is a really good way to look at all the episodes. And says 65 in 1997, being the clueless youth that I was, wanted less talk and more pew-pews, and now, because of my older brain and deeper attention to world events and such, 85 self-sealing stem bolts in combination, but not complication.
Wow.
So
That's a t-shirt.
Our viewers are so damn smart.
Yeah.
And I love the conversation every bit as much as everybody else does. And that's what makes Deep Space Nine so great. All right, so we have another great episode to talk about, and that is Season 5, Episode 12, The Begotten. And I think we should get into it. And this episode aired on January 27th, 1997. We had a few weeks off, but we did not get a few weeks off because our heart was broken, and we needed somebody to please unbreak that heart.
Unbreak my heart, put me in that jar again, zap me with your lasers to make me make some shapes.
There it is. Pull that out of context. The top movie only was, in this week in 1997, how much money do you think it took to make you the top movie?
$60 million.
Less.
$15 million.
Less.
No.
$5 million was all it took.
Okay.
For Jerry Maguire to reclaim number 1 in the 6th week.
Show me the limited amount of box office money.
Show me the small amount. Show me the tiniest amount of money. I mean, I'll take it.
Where is Cuba? Come on back, Cuba.
No, Cuba has gone bad.
Oh, Cuba's bad?
Cuba's bad.
Okay, forget it. Stay away, Cuba.
I forget exactly what it is, but it's not good.
Okay.
Anyway, so
I rely on Keith to tell me who's good and bad. World events, complicated. Cancellations, Keith knows.
I got the cancellation Rolodex. That's because I'm checking for my name every day. So
he's got a Google alert. Keith Marty canceled.
I have to be relevant to be canceled. You can't be canceled if nobody gives a crap. All right, Mike, what was on TV tonight?
Keith, a lot of stuff, but the one I want to focus on because it's just so 90s and it's fun to revisit, is that it was the 24th annual American Music Awards aired this evening, Keith, from the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. So I'm just gonna give you a couple of who hosted the American Music Awards of 1997. It's the most 90s thing. I need you to think hard about it.
Sinbad.
Yes!
How did I know that?
I don't know, but you thought...
I did. That was 100% a guess, but I thought, what is the most 90s thing I can think of?
Yeah.
Sinbad.
Yeah, he hosted.
I'm so proud of myself.
Yeah, the winners of the most awards, Keith, was a tie betwixt Whitney Houston, Alanis Morissette, and Toni Braxton.
Okay.
Okay. And here's just a rundown of the top awards. So here you go. Well, we had performances by Keith, Toni Braxton, Brooks and Dunn, Bush, Alan Jackson, Little Richard.
I'm gonna sing some songs. Gonna be great.
Oh,
Texas songs.
Metallica, Motley Crue, Nas, New Edition, Leon Rimes, Rod Stewart, and Keith Sweat. And here we go. Here are the top winners. We had favorite pop rock male artist, Eric Clapton. Favorite pop rock female artist, Alanis Morissette. Keith, favorite pop rock band duo group? Oh, what's the most 90s group you can think of?
It's not Brooks and Dunn?
No, it's Hootie and the Blowfish.
Oh, Jesus.
Favorite pop rock album of 97?
Wait, is the Blowfish singular?
Yes.
It's not like Hootie and the backup band, like
No, Hootie
Springsteen
and the
E
Blowfish.
Street?
The Blowfish being the band.
Okay.
Favorite pop rock album, 1997, come on, Jagged Little Pill, of course.
Of course.
And favorite pop rock new artist, 1997, Jewel.
Okay.
Oh, Jewel's calling right now saying new. I've been...
Jewel?
Don't call it a comeback. I've been for years.
Yeah.
That's all the rock categories, just a couple of pip and pops. Keith Sweat wins favorite soul R&B. Favorite country, Garth Brooks, still rocking. Adult contemporary, Whitney Houston wins. The Smashing Pumpkins, the alt winners. Metallica winning in heavy metal, don't think they ever lost. Rap and hip hop, we got Tupac, still alive at the time. And then, of course, the favorite soundtrack of the year, Keith, Waiting to Exhale.
For Guffman. Okay, well, there, folks, if you want to know everything that is ever known about whatever the heck Mike was talking about for that long, now you know. Keith Sweat, bad name. Not as bad as Dick Sweat, the congressman from New Hampshire, also in the 90s.
I'm so glad there was more to that sentence.
Oh, I mean, everybody, when you begin a sentence, Dick Sweat, you want more. Yeah. Okay. Whew, what was Voyager doing? Coda. The episode Coda is a time loop of death starring Sweeney Todd. So, interesting episode. The weekly world news headline, folks, we're about to catch Bigfoot.
Thank God. It's about time.
Coming real soon.
I always thought Bigfoot would have more than a 4-pack, you know? You think he'd have a 6-pack? He does so much lifting.
Well, it does a lot of lifting. There's not a lot of food in the woods, just berries, you know?
Yeah, that's true.
So I think it's more about, you know, getting to the protein than doing the lifting.
Dingbat plays Russian roulette with a fully loaded revolver. Judge orders Practical Joker not to laugh for 6 months.
Okay, sure.
Man, they phoned it in this week.
In Jamaica, nonetheless. Well, and I had to go into the inner pages because the outer pages were too offensive to put on. To put on our show, which is really saying something. Yeah. The director of The Begotten was Jesus Salvador Trevino, the first of 3 episodes of Deep Space Nine. Welcome, I thought you did a great job. It says a teleplay by Renee Echevarria, who does a lot of the emotionally deep and complex episodes. Always happy to see Renee on the writer's list. You want to know what everyone's happy to hear about, Mike?
What's that?
What time it is. Now, Keith, waste your time with trivial trivia.
When am I going to get to see them playing at the nightclub? That looks awesome. I never actually watched the B-roll on that. Is that coming up?
We're like 100 and something episodes in. You've never watched the B-roll on Trivial Trivia?
It never stuck out to me, but now I'm like, oh wait, that looks fun.
It's coming. It's coming. The nightclub is about to become a major character on the show.
Loving it.
You don't even know. There's a few things So, all right. So, sorry, to go on a ramble here. There are several things that I am shocked in this rewatch we have not come across yet.
Okay, the nightclub being one.
And Vix is one of them. The fact that we have only seen a certain Vorta once at this point, that there's and a certain Cardassian buddy only a couple of times. There are major players yet that we've like either not mentioned at all or like are not major, or they just sort of like little bits here and there, and it's really fascinating to be halfway through season 5 and still they're not here yet. Interesting. I don't know, just because in my brain they take up a much larger space.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned that, Keith. I was thinking the other day, my brother-in-law came to visit and he was looking at my posters and stuff, and we had a brief conversation about some things, and it made me reflect on the Out of Practice podcast, which if you haven't watched, folks, we did all of the seasons of the practice.
Yeah.
Which was another show I had never watched before. Very similar setup to this. Point being, we got through all 8 seasons of that show, and here we are, sort of still in the getting to the middle of season 5 of Deep Space Nine. And I can easily say with 100% faith, as much as I loved the practice, that my heart belongs to these characters individually much more than I ever attached to any of the practice characters.
Yeah, well, the practice was a little bit more procedural, right? It was, is much more about the cases, which I liked, and that is kind of the way Next Gen was. There's more like character thing with Next Gen than there is on the practice, where it's more like we have characters here, but we're here to set up an idea that we're going to debate. Whereas Deep Space Nine is much more character based than either one of them, I think.
I mean, that's not to say if someone was to 3D print a Bobby Donnell action figure that I wouldn't want it instantly, but,
Yeah, there's got to be a Bobby Donnell action figure somewhere.
Well, that's for a different show.
Different show. All right, so Trivial Trivia, remember? That's what we're doing? So Miles O'Brien mentions not being able to witness Keiko give birth to Molly. And there's a reason for that. It's the episode Disaster from The Next Generation. I'm not going to give much more information about it because maybe that'd be a good one for Keith and Mike watch. Because it is very Keiko and O'Brien heavy, as well as a really fun episode.
Okay.
And Worf heavy. So, it's very much tied into our storylines here. So, Kira gives birth to Kiriyoshi O'Brien in this episode. And he was obviously placed in the womb by Keiko in body parts, but we know this. In the original draft of the teleplay of this episode, Kira was perfectly happy about giving the baby up to the O'Briens, but Nana felt it wasn't realistic and that Kira would feel a degree of attachment to the child. So she asked Ira Steven Behr to change the script, resulting in the final scene of the episode between Kira and Odo, which I think is a great change. Of this issue, Visitor commented in 1999, "That's something I wish we'd been able to delve into more, the complications and what that actually feels like. I had just given birth. I mean, the whole storyline was designed to help me, to allow me to be pregnant while we were shooting and not have to hide behind a table every second. And having just given birth myself, it got to be very complicated emotionally for a woman to do this, who give up children. But, that's another series." But I think that a couple things. One, Nana's personal experience there, I think, is wonderful and so great. But also Ira's willingness to then adjust that storyline to make it, and it makes it deeper and better. And that's where you have like the collaborative effort here. I think made the episode and the series better.
She's awesome.
She's really great. Try not to sneeze. I'm not gonna do it.
You gotta let it go.
No, I hate sneezing. So this is the last one. I think it's actually really interesting, and when I went back and watched it again, I was like, this is very impressive. So, the shot from behind the changeling baby, as it looks towards Odo and Mora, as the changeling attempts to mimic Odo's face, was not budgeted. So where you see the changeling, and then you in the foreground, and you have Odo and Mora in the background. Such a great shot. but it wasn't budgeted. And it's a shot that the director, Trevino, came up with on set. Because there was no money left, there was no way the shot could be handled as a post-production special effect. So it was going to be abandoned until assistant director Louis Rice came up with an innovative idea. He put a stocking over his hand and covered it with goo and held it up in front of the camera. And to everyone's amazement, the shot looks fine. I think the shot looks great.
Yeah.
Once I went back and looked at it again. And as Renee says, that shot would have cost thousands of dollars in post-productions, but these guys did it for nothing. It was just a great moment in guerrilla filmmaking. When I went back and I watched the episode the second time, I looked for it, and I was like, that is really impressive. Mike, you want to know who else is really impressive?
Keith, you can only be talking about the good people of the Patreon.
Indeed.
They give us their hard-earned money, and we all know how hard it is to earn money in this world, just to kind of help us offset our time that we spend talking and making the podcast. I'd like to thank those people by saying their names out loud on the internet. Brian Kimball Biersuck, Jason Moe, Peter Bank, Frank Rinch, Quark's Bar, Joshua Cronin, Ryan Chesley, Merritt Neef, Andrew Hayes, Alan, and the Mysterious, Worf's Boot Shivs, Charles Babbage, Harry Pothead, Alan, Anton Thies, Carl Fisher, all the good folks at CRM Productions, all the fine folks at Nikolay Ivanovich Lobachevsky, Delusions at Noon, YouTube Viewer, James Hubbard, Hibernation Pod, Miri Holcomb, and the people who send us things in the mail, and we appreciate that for sure. JD Makes, Colin Dagan, Chris Mitchell, Pat, Joshua Cronin, and of course, whatever the last thing is, A, JD, Lutz Kremer, Wyatt Eldridge, and Andreas Eriksson. Don't forget, of course, the Chancellor Jen, who is also a fine patron. You can join these people in all of the fun stuff we do over on the feed behind the paywall, which is watch me watch the episodes, watch other episodes of Trek AMAs at times. And we even have some picnics where we watch movies together, and we're going to do a little town hall where if people want to come and meet each other on camera, they can do so, or if not, they just want to participate audio only. Also fine. You can join those fine folks at patreon.com/K&M. Our eternal gratitude to every one of them, and to all of you who participate on the YouTube channel.
Indeed. All right, so our guest stars this week are Rosalind Chow back as Keiko O'Brien, always welcome. Duncan Rager as Shakar.
Less welcome.
It's not your fault, Duncan. You were great. Peggy Rader as Yapora, and James Sloyan back as Maura Pohl. I think it's time we head into the screening room.
Let's do it. Keith? Forget it. I was gonna make a more Pohl joke, but I'm too sophisticated now.
Yes. I mean, look, we all wish we had a little more Pohl.
Unbreak my pole.
All right. Yeah, okay. So in our teaser, that looks like me doing just about anything. Odo is not adjusting to his humanoid body very well. He's got back pain and is back in Bashir's office complaining about it. He's also turned out to be hypochondriac, which I think is a hilarious.
Do you want to know why this was so great for me? Because yesterday I woke up and a part of me that's never hurt before hurt. This is called being 40. It was like my side of my pec or something. And I was like,
buddy, we're not 40 anymore.
No. And I was like, yo, why does that hurt? I haven't been lifting anything. I haven't been doing anything crazy. I must have slept funny, but I've never hurt this before. And then I was like, oh my God, is there a lump? Do I have, like, what's happening? So I was Odo yesterday.
Yeah. I mean, I'm Odo pretty much every day.
Yeah.
Julian reassures him that he's not dying, but his rigid posture is messing up his back. We also find out that Odo's been having trouble pooping, which I suppose would be yet another undignified adjustment that Odo has to make as a solid. Then Quark comes in and somehow and has something he knows Odo will want. It's a dead changeling in a jar. Odo recognizes it immediately and recognizes it's not dead, it's sick. and he's instantly fascinated and buys it from Quark. And I guess we skipped the part of the episode where we tell Quark that you can't buy and sell sentient life forms.
On the black market? Yeah, probably bad.
Yeah. I feel like Odo would have been on that, but I also understand why he's a little distracted. Bashir suggests putting it in a stasis field, but Odo says, not necessary, it's just a baby. And that takes us out of our teaser, that's interesting.
Yeah, yes, 100%.
So in Act 1, Odo reminds Sisko and the audience that centuries ago, the founders released 100 baby changelings into the universe to see what people would do with them.
So we've only ever cataloged 2 of them, though, right? Odo and this one.
That's right.
So there's 98 other stories to tell.
That's right. And they're all over the entire universe. So I mean, they went to a different quadrant to find these 2. So they're, who knows where they are? Because they could still be goo. They could be fully functioning people. They could know about the founders. They could not know about the founders. There's a lot going on there, which I think is interesting. This obviously is how Odo began as well, utterly helpless and unaware of even what it is. Sisko
also
sees
very
the
easy
obvious.
for them to get sick and die, apparently, right?
Yeah, it got hit with radiation something.
Yeah, but I figure there's radiation all over the universe, right? So of those 100, I wonder how many they thought would actually survive.
Well, and that's, God.
Because they're probes, really. They're less individuals and more just probes.
But it's really interesting to think about it from the founder's perspective, because like they're always like, no changeling has ever harmed another, and that's like fundamental and core to our entire society. But we're just gonna throw some babies into the river and see what happens, knowing that harm was, of course, going to come to them. So, and their goal is that, as opposed to reaching out and exploring like the Federation does and try to seek out new civilizations, they just throw a baby at it and see if they eat the baby or not, which I think is fascinating and cold. Anyway, so Sisko sees the obvious benefit of studying the infant, and Odo asks to take care of it until it's able to take humanoid form. Sisko suggests bringing in Dr. Mora, because he's the one who raised Odo in a very similar situation, but Odo is naturally a hell no to that. Which is, like, let's call in your dad to help you with your project here.
Yeah, and I like it because the last time we saw Mora, we got a lot of the context, right, of Odo's trepidation and their relationship, but we also got a little bit of Odo wanting to impress him and a paternal connection, so we didn't get a ton of resolution in that episode, and it's so cool that we're revisiting it so we can maybe get some more.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, because this is a classic father-son story told through a sci-fi lens. And it has all that depth and complexity that anyone who's been a father or a son, and I'm sure it is also true of mothers and daughters and such, that's just only our experience. But yeah, I mean, right in there. We see Odo wince at the very idea of bringing him in, and like, we get it. So Bashir starts work on curing the radiation poisoning, and it mostly works. But they're going to have to keep an eye out for biometric fluctuations, Chekhov's biometric fluctuations. But the goo is clear now. But he's got to go. Bashir's got to go because Kira is in labor, which Odo shrugs this off distractedly, which is an odd color for Odo, sort of. Because I wasn't sure, I'm still not sure how I feel about that moment and that take on it, knowing the importance of Kira in Odo's life. But so like, it seems a little cold. It seems a little like,
it didn't read cold to me. He was just so invested here. I mean, there's so many layers of investment. He's no longer a changeling. We've heard him in many times kind of say, I miss it in certain ways. He definitely did not like or approve of the way he was brought up, so he's feeling all those triggers and vulnerabilities, and I think he can make it. I just think he's so invested. It didn't read cold to me, but I catch your point for sure.
Well, I think you're exactly right on that's what the storytelling is, right? Is like he becomes instantly obsessed and invested, and this is not something we haven't seen from Odo before, right? And like in The Search, right, where he abandons everybody to go find his home world, and we openly wondered, and I think it's not necessarily fully answered, like is there a genetic component which drives him to do this? How much agency does he have when this type of obsession kicks in? And I wonder if there might be some level of that here too, some sort of a genetic component to be drawn to care for, to be, you know, this other changeling. I don't really know, but it is it's fascinating. So it's maybe like I wince a little bit because I want Odo to care more about Kira in that moment, but I think it's consistent with the character of Odo.
And also at this point too, which I think is cool, is we know that the founders removed his ability to shapeshift, but we don't know if they've removed, well, and I think there's been indications that they haven't, there's still sort of a link there, and there's still sort of a pull and a drive. So I'm sure that this changeling is, there's some, well, we learn later there's a great connection, but there could be something else pulling, you know?
Well, and we, you know, the few episodes ago where Odo like caused a link among the buddies, and we went back in time and saw what he did. Clearly, the idea that like he's not fully, completely human has been planted at this point. Anyway, Odo is enraptured with the goo and begins talking to it kindly. He was never talked to as a baby because Mora thought he was just a specimen, and Odo is gonna get it right this time. And I think a lot of people who become parents, this is like core to their whole experience. Meanwhile, Kira is in labor, and O'Brien and Keiko are doing a Bajoran ritual to help her become calm enough to have the baby. O'Brien has to hit a gong in tempo and sucks at it, and it's not helping her. It's pretty funny stuff. The second good comedic scene involving a gong on Star Trek. They have one in the first season of Next Gen. Also pretty funny. They're all waiting for Shakar to get there, but he's super late. And when he arrives, it's too late to have the baby. And everybody...
But this was bringing me... there's an argument to be made that it's a little hokey, or maybe the comedy doesn't work for all. It does for me for the most part, so I don't... But I'm saying I would buy that argument if you thought, in the context of such a heartfelt episode in the A story, that this was a little too much. But I disagree, but not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is, recently I've a good handful of friends who are in parental situations that are not traditional, like traditional, right? The adoptions where the biological family is involved, or where there was
interesting
unique circumstances, not important with the specifics. But that all said, that was not something you really visited much in the 90s. That's feels very contemporary, not to say that those types of relationships didn't happen, or those types of arrangements weren't. They just weren't. We didn't see them in media.
It wasn't part of the cultural lexicon.
Yeah, so I really think it's cool that we get to see. They don't. What is never the joke in this scenario is that the O'Briens are mixed with Kira, and it's all played completely like, yeah, cool. We took her in. I rub her feet, like we're helping her out. It's not.
Well, it's a surrogate sort of a thing.
But they're incorporating the Bajoran culture, and Molly and Miles. The conflict isn't that Miles and Keiko are don't like that or don't want that. They very much are respectful.
We want to do it the human way.
Yeah,
right.
I just like the way they handled it. It felt very respectful, and all of it seemed to track for me, at least.
Yeah, I agree. In Quarks, Odo continues talking to the baby, now holding it in a glass mug. Which I was like, why would he do that in a mug? But then I thought, the handle actually would be helpful. So, but of course, Worf comes up and asks Why are you talking to your beverage? Great take from Dorn.
The better take is when he looks at his drink before he exits the scene. That's funny.
I mean, look, if you have only one line in an episode, nail it. And you know Dorn's going to. So later, Odo begins to try to get the baby to make shapes. And he says, "You have no idea of the marvels that are in store for you. Do you know what you are? You're a changeling, a shapeshifter. You can be anything, a Tarkalian hawk soaring in the sky, or a Philian python burrowed deep beneath the ground. It's all yours for the taking. I was never a very good shapeshifter. If you could see the face I'm stuck with, you'd know what I mean. But I think I can be a good teacher, and you'll be better than I ever was, and I promise I will never treat you in the way I was treated. Never." And I can only sort of empathize with the feelings that he must be going through as a parent. But I can certainly imagine saying something very similar, and that this is a universal feeling for early parents. And I mean, God, it's complicated. And naturally, this is the moment when Grandpa Boomer, Dr. Mora, Odo's sort of father, arrives and says, "I'm here to help." And we all wince.
Do you know what they do a great job of, the writers in this episode? Is because, let's be honest, I think Mora's got more technobabble than anybody. You know what I mean? Like all of his discussion of his experiments on Odo and all that stuff. But the way they use coded language, all of the technobabble is really just coded language for parenthood and our relationships with our parents and their techniques and their sort of subtle justifications for said techniques without admitting at first that they might have made some mistakes or they might have hurt our feelings.
Or ever. Right? I mean...
Yes, or ever, but I'm speaking uniquely to this circumstance.
Yes, yeah.
Really, really well done. Well done.
I mean, it's so... You're right. It is all sci-fi coded, but it is so clear. You know, and it's so generational too, because it's like our parents' generation, like their parents beat them up, right? And then maybe our parents spanked us, and now the generation of parents now would never. And we're all sort of having the conversation upstream about like, hey, that wasn't good.
Everybody wants credit for, right? They broke some cycle and they want credit for that. They're not willing to accept their failings in that, just like, well, I didn't hit you, right? It's very...
Well, right. And the justifications. Well, here's why it was okay. Here's why it was a good thing that I did this or the other thing. And, you know, I guess I'll just say it now. I've been thinking a lot about this episode and the last episode. About the gray areas in everything, and nobody's fully right and nobody is fully wrong. These are two episodes that dovetail. One is about war and occupation, and this is about parenting. And
if you've met any parents, it also is a war, right? Because
it for sure.
Especially a lot of times, just to make a point we made last week, you know, we talked about how a lot of these kids were thrown into it as children. Right? Had no idea how to be soldiers. Well, many parents are way too young or just have no education. There ain't no handbook of how to be a parent, right?
No.
I'll never forget my brother, quickly. I think I've told the story before. I'll tell it quickly. Both of his daughters were premature. And I remember the first baby, Isabella, bringing her home. My brother's, Isabella's mom had to stay in the hospital for a few extra days, and we were bringing Bella home, and I was in the car with my brother, and she was tiny, man, tiny, and we had her in this seatbelt contraption thing, and she looked like a doll. And my brother just broke down crying in the front seat, and he was like, "I have no idea how to like take care of this thing," and I was like, "Yeah, dude." God bless. We just like went off in a car, and that was it. It's not like they sent you home with paperwork. You know what I
No,
mean?
and you're just forced to make impossible choices endlessly with very little information.
And you'll be wrong 90% of the time.
And you're wrong 90% of the time. And you will be held accountable for everything you did, good, bad, ugly, intentionally or not. And you see parents, you know, your making the wrong choices for the right reasons. You're making the right choices for the wrong reasons, and it's just that's part of the reason I'm not a parent. And I think it's just because like I would desperately want to do a good job and do all the things that Odo wants to do, but then I'd bring in my own foibles and my own failures. Anyway, we're in Act 2 of this whole saga here, but this is going to be the conversation. This is the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. I love that they don't. In my opinion, they don't tease out the conflict for too long. They don't use the coded language and all that stuff for too long. They let them get into it. Yeah. Early, so that we can have the conversation, right? I think it's paced incredibly well.
So I think it's handled so well. Mm-hmm. And of course, Mora immediately starts criticizing Odo's parenting and scientific methodologies. However, his wig line is very poorly blended in this scene.
The worst part of the episode.
I was like, what? He asks Odo how he's doing.
He looks like me right after my dye job.
Exactly. Well, because the professional wigs, they have like this fabric layer that goes around the edge that allows it to blend, so you don't see like the wig line like me in the Titanic tour. But if you don't blend that in, it's going to stick out there and flop. And I can't. It's so crazy when you have Odo's incredibly complex makeup.
AI upscale's not helping.
Fair. Totally fair. Anyway, so he asks Odo how he's doing now that he's been forced to be a solid. Odo doesn't want to talk about vulnerable things with Mora, and he gets very angry when Mora starts getting the baby. And like Odo's defensive, I'm not going to talk about vulnerable things with you because I'm mad because you betrayed. Oh my God, like life, right? Mm-hmm. And so Odo says, Dr. Mora, I understand that you want to help, but I'm going to do this alone. And in the stage directions, and this is very clear in the episode, Mora smiles in a way that Odo finds condescending. Mm-hmm. Alone, but Odo, you don't know the first thing about teaching a changeling how to shapeshift. I'll muddle through somehow, you did. It's too warm in here. A changeling morphogenic matrix is most malleable at 17 degrees Celsius. I used to be able to change my shape in almost any temperature, but why not make it easy for the changeling? Then Mora mentions his tests, and Odo remembers them well. And Mora says, so that's what this is all about. You still resent the things I did to induce you to shapeshift. I know they weren't pleasant for you, but really, Odo, I'd have hoped you'd have moved past that by now. I'm disappointed. Ugh. Again.
Yeah. Triggers all over the place. But to like counterpoint here, the context that I thought was really interesting and really brings the conversation some nuance and depth is that and I think for me the key thesis word for this episode is perspective, because what Odo doesn't and Renee does such a great job of playing, because remember we've talked about it, like in the grand scheme of things, Odo's not a full-fleshed adult yet still. He's still kind of like
he has sort of like teenage tendencies.
Yeah, and what he doesn't give... So Odo's aware of his feelings, emotions, and experience when he was going through the things with Mora. But as we come to learn, second he took off. So Mora doesn't have that perspective. He's never heard he doesn't know what Odo is experiencing going through it. That's the perspective he's missing, which he's now reaching out for in his way, whereas Odo only experienced, from his perspective, the condescension, you didn't treat me as a human. Like, he's not giving him any grace, right? And that's the cool thing I've learned in my life experience, and we'll talk about this later, but like allowing this grace that neither of them is really... or that Odo isn't at first here, and that's the journey we have to go through in these 45 minutes.
Well, I think grace is a huge part of it, and I think what you're articulating here is that the problem between these two people is neither one of them are taking into account the other's experience of Odo's childhood. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
Obviously, Mora not taking in Odo's experience of what he went through, and Odo's mad about it.
Right.
Makes perfect sense. But Odo is not taking into account Mora's experience and
in the moment, right?
In the moment, in the moment, just like, I didn't really know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I was, like, I was under all this pressure. I was scared. We're going to get into it. But, like, this episode is about being able to integrate the emotional and practical experience of the other person, and allow, and again, no one's right, no one's wrong 100%. But with integrating the knowledge of the other experience, adding the complexity of the parent's experience and the child's experience, you then can find grace. And if that's not what every child of a parent and parent of a child spends the adult child's existence doing, then you're not doing it right.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because a lot of we joke to my mom all the time. We're like, we all grew up, we all made it, we all have jobs, we have roofs over our heads, we never got into hard drugs or did anything like we're ever in prison or anything like that. Like, you won parenting, basically. And I think a lot of parents look at it that way, right? Like, I got them to where they needed to get, which is great and true in many ways. But then also, that doesn't mean along the way there are micro traumas and all kinds of stuff that have accumulated. It's just,
and stuff that the healthiest of us will work through and process those things, as opposed to swallow those things and build a real connection, as opposed to sort of this like confrontational separation that happens when you don't make eye contact with the experiences of both sides.
Yeah.
And good, bad, or ugly. And there's some accountability that needs to happen. They did make mistakes. Also, they were trying their best. Oh my God, we're getting into my life, right? But like, okay, mistakes, you made mistakes. You should have made mistakes. You should have been accountable, should have done better. Also, you were doing the best you could, and you were just as limited as any of the rest of us, and allowing those things to exist at the same time. Blah, blah, blah.
It's not
very
blah, blah,
heady
blah,
episodes.
We're gonna get there.
Yeah.
We're
Two very
the back
heady
half of this
episodes in a
episode is
row.
going to be a conversation, so we'll try to wait for it.
We're already there. So Odo is going to raise the child his way, but Mora will stay and observe. Back in Kira's room, we find out that she's not going to have the baby today. She wasn't able to relax fast enough, and O'Brien is annoyed at Bajoran Ken. Odo begins trying to get the goo to take shape. He tries talking it into moving, telling him the story of Mora zapping him into taking shapes. Obviously an analogy. Odo is pissed at Mora for his motivation by punishment, and Mora is annoyed at Odo for being too soft. And Odo tries kindly for a week, but has made no progress. And Mora says, "It's been almost a week and it's only grown 17%. After 3 days in my lab, you were twice the size." Odo says, "Maybe I was anxious to grow up so I could get out of here." Ouch. "My point is, you've made no progress. By this time, I'd already gotten you to mimic half a dozen simple forms. I'm trying to gain its trust, not teach it tricks. Everything I did was for your own good. True, some of the tests I subjected you proved inconclusive." And Odo bitterly says, "The vacuum chamber springs to mind. The cytoplasmic separator, and come to think of it, the protein decoupler too." Obviously, like, it's technobabble, but like, we all know what he means, right? "How could I know until I tried? By the prophets, Odo, I wasn't even sure you were a life form." And Odo says, "I wasn't sure about you either. Oof. Once I realized you were sentient, the Cardassians wanted to know everything about you, and I was under enormous pressure to get results. And I did. My techniques worked. The fact that you're standing here whining about them is proof." Oof, yeah, right?
This argument is like, as difficult as it is, it felt for me very therapeutic, because specifically fathers and sons often never have this fight. It's what's always under the surface. It's always bubbling, but it's never said out loud, and that is frustrating. And so to even hear two people have the argument is freeing. Seriously, it's like a freeing feeling. And I was like, say it, get it out, spit it out.
Yes. I mean, this episode is a roadmap for fathers and sons. And there are situations where this is not helpful and not healthy.
Yeah.
Plenty of examples, but in a lot of cases, this is a great roadmap for the type of repair we're talking about.
Yeah. This is also the one part of the episode where the pacing feels a little bit off, right? I would have loved this argument to have happened maybe in the pre-montage, or because Ben coming in right here and sort of clarifying Mora's point with like the pressure, where Mora's trying to explain to Odo and then Ben puts it on Odo, felt a little ham-fisted, just a sleeps, but you know what I'm saying? Like it happened right after the argument, so
Yeah, but I think it needed to happen after the montage because otherwise Sisko wouldn't be there pushing.
Yeah.
Anyway, the last piece of this couplet is Odo says, "You enjoyed watching me suffer." Mora says, "Do you really believe that? How pathetic. If it weren't for me, you'd still be sitting on a shelf somewhere in a beaker labeled unknown sample." And as I said, anyone who's been an adult child to a parent or a parent to an adult child has probably had a version of this fight. It continues to escalate when Sisko arrives and tells them they need to make progress or Starfleet is going to take over. The implication is clear. And Mora says, "Well, now you have an idea of the kind of pressure I was under." And in Act 3, to Odo's...
Great scene here, too, because even though Ben's not in much of the episode, this performance in this one scene gives just enough of an inkling that Ben was pulling these strings, right? He set Mora up to be here. He knew when he had to put the pressure on. He has agency, which is so cool.
And he's protecting Odo and keeping Starfleet at bay.
Yeah.
And all that is going. And dude, clearly, because he walks in on them screaming at each other, and dude understands completely what's going on here, as both a father. So
that's
and
great.
A son.
That's not even. It's good writing, but it's mostly great direction. The way they pan, they show the camera shot that establishes that he was there listening. The way that it all of it really works. Great work in this scene.
Yeah, really good work. So in Act 3, to Odo's great discomfort, they've put the baby on one of Mora's machines. It's going to zap the baby until it gets itself to the center of the table. And Mora says, and prepare to wince, 80s kids. Spare the rod, spoil the child. And off Odo's look, he says, without discomfort, the changeling is perfectly content to stay in its gelatinous state. It'll just lie there, never realizing it has the ability to mimic other forms, never living up to its potential. This is painful for Odo, but he does it. And it works. The goo moves to the center. And Odo smiles. And Mora is right there with the dagger. I smiled the first time you did that. Little did I know you'd end up hating me for it.
Woo-hoo! Oh, somebody taught this guy Italian guilt trips.
Yeah, well, I'll see your Italian guilt trip and raise a New England guilt trip.
I got a Rolodex of those trigger warnings. I was like, oh man, you didn't know what you just said. Will stick with me the rest of my life, but there you go.
There it is. So back in Keiko's quarters, Shakar, the boring boyfriend that our hero has to get rid of in every romantic comedy, arrives to discover O'Brien massaging Kira's feet. He wants O'Brien out of there, and they bicker like jealous children for a bit when Kira says it's time. In the science lab, Odo and Mora continue using the same zapping technique to get the baby to take other shapes. Mora says, "This is a smart one. I had to do that 3 times before you caught on. Ouch." Odo says, "Actually, the first 2 times I didn't hold the shape on purpose. I didn't want to give you the satisfaction."
Woo-hoo!
Ouch. oh, the daggers. And so in the stage directions, I thought it was really helpful. It says, "This, more than any jab Odo has taken at Mora, hurts. He truly hadn't considered that Odo was actually resisting his efforts to teach him."
You're right, it does help. And it's actually this scene, I think, that opens the door to some of the mutual respect and reconciliation, because it reminds Dad here of perspective. Oh, wait, I've never looked at it from that angle before.
Right. We are slowly turning the battleship for both of them to see what the other was going through during this formative time. And it's like whether you You think about your parents when you were a kid, and you're only thinking about, well, you did this to me, you didn't do this for me, and you're right, right? 100% valid, 100% right. Also, you think, oh my God, I had no idea the financial pressure my parents were under at this point, or something else was happening, and like, oh wow, I think about what that means to me today. I know what that means to like not be sure you can pay the power bill. And I know what that does to me, and that might affect how I'm handling my personal interactions as well.
It also gave me a little bit of empathy or perspective for like therapists, my therapist particularly. I was like, because if you think about it, for so long, right? Just like we as the audience, we see Odo's emotions and his side of the story this whole time, and so it's we empathize most with him, and just assume the way he feels and what he experienced. You would just assume this guy was a mad scientist who cared nothing for him and was sort of like abusive and took glee in it, right? Just like your therapist, especially early on in your relationship, must think your parent, like if you just went by the way the stories are retold, oh man, your parents are monsters, right? But truth be told, they know from their chair that like, I'm just hearing this tale being told. I'm going to give this person the therapy they need. But the picture as a whole is probably very different, right?
Well, and I think that's where like we say it constantly, allowing two conflicting things to be true at the same time. That the parents' behavior in plenty of situations was not okay. It wasn't good enough. And it's a little bit understandable given the tools that they had and the pressures they were under, and that like the best they could might not be good enough, but it also might be the best they could at the same time, and neither one of those invalidates the other. They're both true at the same
That's us.
time.
We often make space in our emotional chest, right, for just our current feeling, but that's not good.
Yeah.
Got to make sure you make enough space for the conflicting feelings you're having, and also the person you're interacting with.
Well, and that's how you repair a relationship with anybody, especially who have like legitimately wronged you, right, in some ways, but I've also legitimately cared about you, whatever. It's just allowing space for that. Anyway, Mora replies to this, Odo saying that I didn't do some of these things just to piss you off. He says, well, if you're lucky, someday this changeling will give you the satisfaction of saying thank you. You did so much for me. Then again, maybe it'll just end up leaving the way you did, without any warning. It'll just announce that it's striking out on its own, and you'll never hear from it again. And like, Sloyan is giving a terrific performance.
You know what's great about his performance, dude, is that he's very much like a dad that doesn't have a lot of emotional empathy, right? Or he has the empathy. He can't communicate his emotional empathy, right?
Right.
And so he says a lot of these daggers. But at the same time, his presence and his cadence and speaking tenor is very calming and soothing. And those things conflict and cause drama.
Right.
It's really
cool. And the
cool.
vulnerability is very clear there, but he's hiding it.
Yes. They're both just almost saying the thing they want to say.
Right. And they're both they're both almost expressing the emotion that they're feeling.
And also both completely aware that the other is smart enough to pick up their
right. So they can do it all with subtext.
Yeah, it's so great.
Yeah. So he turns to leave, but then the baby rears up and mimics Odo's face. And this turns around a lot. In Act 4,
oh, there
Mora
you go, Keith.
Odo,
there's the screenshot.
No, that's actually not it. That's the CG.
No, I mean for the episode. That's the splash. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, totally. Mora and Odo are absolutely delighted, and they've warmed considerably. Mora says, I was wrong. Your approach to communicating with the changeling was sound. Don't you see? It was reaching out to you. It was curious about you. The first time you did anything even close to that was you formed a tentacle to slap my hand away from the control panel. Odo says, I remember. I wanted you to stop zapping me. You formed a connection with the changeling. And it says in the stage directions, with regret, that's something I never managed to do with you. And Odo says, that's not true. I respected you. You feared me. You didn't know what I was. You were experimenting on what looked like a lump of organic residue. That's what I'd still be if it weren't for you. And Morris says, you don't know how much it means to me to hear you say that. I'm sorry. I know that sort of talk makes you uncomfortable. I suppose it's my fault, in a way. If I hadn't poked and prodded at you so much, you might have ended up with a less forbidding disposition. And Odo says, something tells me that no matter what we do to that changeling, it's going to have a more pleasant disposition than mine. It's just the way I am. Oh my God, what a turn. I mean, to see that empathy, to hear and I'm sorry, and to like get it, right? Like, Jesus Christ. And also Odo owning there's parts of me as well. Wow.
Well,
So in
because
Kira's
it's true,
corner,
right? Like in so many ways, that experience with the chain, like Odo realizes, like he legit could have, he could be on a. We just don't know. He does. All the things. I want to say all the things, but
it's gonna be a very long stem bolts. So, meanwhile, in Kira's quarters, the birthing begins. Discount John Edwards and O'Brien bicker like children. It's a bad look for both of them, and Kira kicks them both out. Later, Quark discovers an ebullient Odo raiding his bar in the middle of the night. He's going to buy Quark a drink. And Quark, of course, is skeptical about this. No, it doesn't fit. If you're happy, something is very wrong in the world. The center cannot hold.
So hold on before you continue, because we're not going to have time to talk about this in stem bolts. I feel like our conversation is going a different way. I want to point out what my initial read of this fear and read of this scene was. At first I thought, aha, the changeling has learned how to mimic Odo. He's becoming Odo, and it's been a planted weapon the whole time. What was not, so I want to just point out how great of a big baddie they've set up the founders as, that even in this emotional episode where I'm having all the feels, I instantly realized, it's a weapon. They found a way to infiltrate again. They got us again. So that overarching fear is still there, baby, and it's still operating. Up until the last second, when they call him away, I thought, here comes the flip. It was a little late in the episode. I was like, maybe it's a two-per. But anyway, I wanted to note that I thought the worst.
Oh, that's fascinating, and I love that. I mean, that's really, really interesting. And it'd be a hell of a story.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, because Odo's smiling.
I felt just like Mark did. I was like, and like him rummaging around in there. I was like, yeah.
Odo smiling and Odo that happy is a little disquieting.
Yeah.
Like it is.
And I was like, oh, they planted the sick foundling. They this whole thing has been a plot.
Yeah. Interesting. But Odo says, no, it's strange. Over the past few months, I came to accept the fact that I'd never have any contact with my people again. They'd rejected me, turned me into a humanoid, and part of me was lost forever. But this little ball of goo sitting on that lab table changed everything. I feel like I'm experiencing what it is to be a changeling again. And somehow, being a solid doesn't seem so bad anymore. And I wrote sort of what we said. Happy Odo is fascinating and a little startling. Then, of course, the computer calls and says the baby is sick. And he rushes off to the infirmary with Mora. And we find out that the baby is dying. And in Act 5, Mora and Bashir work frantically to save its life, but Odo is helpless. In the birthing room, meanwhile, Kira invites O'Brien and I never knocked up Crusher with my ghost candle back in for the birth. Out pops a healthy 6-month-old baby. They're all delighted. But back in the infirmary, Bashir tells Odo there's nothing they can do. And Odo goes to say goodbye to the goo. He pours the baby into his hands and tries to talk to it. when it gets absorbed into his hands and integrates itself into Odo's body. Odo is stunned and walks out of the room and into the promenade. He then turns into a hawk and flies around the station. He solidifies back as himself, both delighted and heartbroken. And go back and watch that one shot. In less than 4 seconds, Renee's face goes from joy to heartbreak to something else. It's unbelievable. Under all that makeup, he's able to show all of that on his face. We don't even need to say a word. It's staggeringly good. Later, Kira says goodbye to Shakar at the airlock. He wants her to come visit, but she wants to stay and be close to the baby. It's a bit of an awkward goodbye. Meanwhile, also leaving on the shuttle is Dr. Mora. And Odo says, I wish, asks like, are you happy to be a changeling again? He says, I wish it hadn't happened the way it did. And he says, I'm sorry. If it helps, think of it as a gift, something the changeling wanted you to have. And Odo says, I think I finally understand how much I meant to you and what you must have gone through when I left. You had to find your own way in the world. I should have included you in my life, Odo says. And Mora says, you still can. They hug, and Odo, this is what broke me, puts his head on Mora's shoulder like a child. Ah! Okay, you got me. That's what I was like. I'm holding it together. And he puts his head on his shoulder like a kid, and that is what broke me.
It's funny. It was before that. It was the line. It was "You still can," and I realized that, for some of us, you can't.
Yeah.
The time is limited, and that's kind of the thing that is the sad, right? That will always be the sad, right? Is that. Keith, the one thing I appreciate about you and about this conversation we have often is that, we're two people who have done a lot of the work, not all of it, a lot of it. We're in process of it. But you become the person who has the space to finally have some of these conversations and feel these things and maybe reconcile some of these differences. And let me tell you, I was a teenager too. I was an adolescent. You are not prepared. Sure. You are not baked enough as a human being to understand the nuance necessary to have that type of relationship with your parents. You're not. Right?
Sure.
And how lucky are those who develop enough to have the conversation? I mean, I guess it requires two to tango, right? Your parents kind of get there too. But
no, you can't do it by yourself.
But I recognize that I'm not there. A lot of the growth and the grace I've offered my dad, to be specific, is unilateral, right?
You have to do it by yourself.
A lot of assumptions, and I just will never get to square that circle. And but I'm so thankful to be able to have conversations with people who are willing and able, and friends who are willing and able, and media that will give me some catharsis, and that was a great deal of it was felt during this episode, and that's why if you watch the watch along, I lost it. I just broke it. It was. It's not, it's not blubbering, but even just a little bit of it bubbling up feels good.
I mean, and I think cathartic is exactly right, and to be given this pathway, right, to be given this template, whether or not you're able to do it, whether your parents are still with you or not, right, whether you're doing it internally with the memory of your parent, with what you're doing, or whether you're doing it directly with your parent, like I do, I think that Odo's saying, I think I finally understand how much I meant to you and what you must have gone through when I left. Like you said, time is finite, right? And whether or not your parent lives to 95 or they're gone early, the time that you have with them is finite, and that the pain everybody is feeling is real. And the pain Odo was feeling was real, and the pain that Mora was feeling was real, and the time that lapsed while that was happening comes at a cost. And I think that is, I mean, it's real, It's really fascinating, but like to see, and like all of their problems aren't done, right? All of the things that went wrong, the pain that they caused each other, right, are real. But to even have this element of repair is really quite something. So Mora leaves, and Kira runs into Odo. They're both a little heartbroken. And Kira says, I got into this because the O'Briens needed my help. I never wanted a baby. But right now, I just wish I could hold him in my arms and never let go. And Odo says, I think I know how you feel, Nerys. Kira just says, want to take a walk? And that is the end of The Begotten. Let's do our little nonsense show. All right, so wormholes. Any wormholes?
The thing that it's not really wormhole as much as a question, and I guess we don't have an answer yet, but I'll bring it up. Is so we know of 2 of these 98, right? Changelings that were sent, probe changelings. And we only know of them that both of them needed sort of scientific means to realize their potential. And yet, there are all these goos or founders and all that exist totally independent of such. And so my question really revolves around, like, what is the actual gestation of a founder, right? Like, are they just split goo off? Or how long would it take without human or whatever scientific intervention for them to fully bake out? Would they? Could they? That seems curious to me.
I think, well, the couple things we know. One is that I believe they kind of live forever.
Right.
Or at least we have never spoken to a lifespan, and that their growth is not sort of an organic growth. It's the more they shift, the more they grow. So I would imagine if they just landed on an empty moon, it would take them a very, very long time. But the same way evolution works. How did we go from a pile of goo, as Q would say, here on the planet, to a walking, talking creature? It takes time, and who knows? So, good question though. I really don't know the answer.
But outside of that, really nothing. There's nothing that even struck me. Other than Quark, like, why are you dealing with like human or living creatures on the black market? But I guess that's Quark and a Quark.
Quark and a Quark, and like, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess Quark wouldn't say he sold it to Cisco, and Cisco, yeah. I think to come up with any wormholes here would just be nitpicking for the sake of nitpicking. Let's talk best moment.
There's so many good moments, but for me, I'm actually going to choose Odo's first monologue. The first time he has the little goo in a cup, and it's just, they just one single take it from far out up to close up. And because he really lays the foundation for the whole journey ahead. In fact, at some times, I thought to myself during that, I was like, there's no way they're going to be able to reconcile all of this by the end of the episode. Because he talks about how he was unhappy with the way he was raised. He's going to do it better this time. He was never even the founder he wanted to be. He was never a good shapeshifter. He sets up such lofty goals that you're just like, how is this all going to crumble in his face? And yet, despite that, the episode actually takes a really well-paced journey and resolves all, for the most part, satisfyingly, the whole journey. So I think that setup for me, I'm going to set as the best moment.
Yeah.
So many good picks, though. So many good other moments.
There's so many good scenes. I mean, for me, I think it would be... It's gonna be Renee's, like I said at the end, what broke me. Like, Renee's choice to lay his head on Mora's shoulder. Like, I don't know, I forgot to go back and look in the script, how is the hug described? But I think it probably just says they hug. And when he goes in for the hug, and then he puts his head on the shoulder, making Renee the child in that hug. And because we're repairing Renee's childhood relationship with his father as much as the adult relationship, and like Renee's vulnerability, Odo's vulnerability that he shows in that moment there to show that child part of him, I thought was just like, just beautiful.
Yeah, because what it shows too is that like, because to hear Odo describe it, he never had any affection for Mora.
No.
Right?
No.
But yet his defiance and his anger and all of that is so strong that it must be in conflict with something, right? And then after this sort of repair happens, him showing a very affectionate gesture shows us that, oh wow, there was a well of affection. He's just been obfuscating it.
Yeah.
It's just really amazing to be able to do in just like some physical acting.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think that's what I think is so damn impressive about the whole thing. But there's so many good scenes out there, for sure. Let's hand out some stem bolts, shall we?
You get some stem bolts. Hell yeah, they are self-sealing. Here are some stem bolts for you.
Yeah. So many things. First, I guess I'll get my big nitpick out of the way. The B plot kind of sucks. It's fine. It's just not even in the same ballpark. However, it's not a total write-off because the thing missing from the episode is, right, like the O'Brien's baby is born, and we don't. It's very Kira focused and her experience focused, and we don't get to really see the O'Briens in this episode, at least, like celebrate and enjoy that they just had a baby. I mean, it's like it's their baby, right? So that's.
I mean, they have it a bit, but
yeah. I mean, like I said, it's a small nit. But that would be sort of one thing. But that's all in service to Kira's part of the last beat, and that last beat is also very affecting, and it actually works, right? I was like, there's no way that they can make that mean something important to the episode, and they do. I think maybe it sets up some long-term stuff to get Shakar the hell out of there, hopefully, because it was an awkward goodbye and it felt intentionally so, but I don't know, we can deal with that another time. So I'm not going to ding the B story too much because it was kind of pleasant and was kind of funny in some spots, and I think it made sense, and I liked culturally how it showed their sort of blending, and also it set Kira up for somehow made Nana and Kira have a journey in such a small. So it was good. So ultimately, it worked, I guess, is what I just figured out for myself. I loved this episode. I had no idea where it was going to take me when we started, but sometimes I find the teasers I have to go back and rewatch them, just to see what the clue was. But here it didn't matter what the clue was because it set up a story that I was like, I'm in. Oh, baby Goo and Odo's in charge? I'm in. Didn't know Mora was coming back, but then he did. And I recognized that everything they set up with him early, there was... we, in the first episode, were sort of the adolescent, right? Where we had very strong feelings, we really kind of knew where we stood, and we had an opinion about...
Take that, you asshole.
So that when they introduced Mora into this episode, I had an opinion, and I knew what I thought. And the episode proceeded to crush that, and to allow me to force myself to look at another perspective, and
without ever invalidating the things that Odo was pissed off about.
I got to watch Odo grow. I got to watch myself grow. I got to watch Mora grow. I got to watch Cisco have agency in such. I got to see. I formed a little bit of a bond with Goo Baby, right? There was because Odo was written to perfectly articulate what his experience, what their experience might be.
Yeah.
We talked during the episode about sort of my personal feelings and how that, it's kind of a dose. I didn't get to have that relationship with my father as much. A little bit when he was towards the end of his life, when he was feeling his mortality was setting in. We had some conversations, but at the time I was 18 years old, and
how could you?
It just
Your
wasn't.
brain's not
I wasn't
formed
there.
yet.
Yeah. And there's some. So I do attempt on the other side, to have that kind of conversation with my mom at her age and reconcile some things. And it's hard because she is not as far along, but it's not impossible. And I will continue to do so. And it's interesting because I watch my siblings and a lot of my siblings-in-laws be parents and see them fail and see them make decisions that I can very easily see with my perspective from as an outsider as being boneheaded.
Yep, you're going to talk about that later.
Yeah, but also realize that they are going through an impossible circumstance, right? They are being parents, and that is impossible.
Impossible. Yep.
So, just so much, dude, and that it is everything I want in TV. And y'all know I love the big pew pew grand table setting episodes. I am gonna go out there, Keith, and maybe I'm just feeling this way, and think that this is my favorite character study episode. I think for me it trumps Duet. I think for me it moved me, and it did not do so cloyingly or artificially.
No.
I think I'm going to give it 98 self-sealing stem bolts. It is as close to perfect as you can get for me as far as what I want out of an episode of television. It just had a couple of little things that'll ding it, but 98, A+.
Yeah. I mean, I think this episode is a hidden gem of Deep Space Nine, and it's well respected, but it's one of those ones, because it's not a big pew pew or it's not a big whatever, it gets sort of shuffled into oh, that's a good episode, and but when you really make eye contact with it, it's fantastic. I think I continue to grow in my respect for Renee Echevarria as a writer. And I think Renee does complex human relationship, emotional stories probably better than anybody else on the staff. And I know that when Renee writes an episode, it's not about the sci-fi, it's not about the pew-pew, it's not about the action, but it's about human character feeling stuff, and I think he just does it really, really well. Dude has been through, I would assume, a fair amount of therapy, or is a therapist, or his spouse is a therapist. I don't know what's going on. I think maybe Renee's spouse is a therapist. I've read that somewhere. Anyway, just so insightful and so real and not cloying and not saccharine. And I think that is just really, really impressive. In terms of the B story, right? The Odo and Dum Dum Ken, not Odo, O'Brien and Dum Dum Ken and their little jealousy, whatever. Who cares? I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's a little ham-fisted, but whatever. You got to have some sort of a story there. But I think having these two stories dovetail are very important. A, we got to get this baby. We got to get the baby out of Kira, and then that's not pregnant anymore. But also, and I think that the direction and the storytelling beats there. It's birth and death, right?
Yeah. It's
the death of one and the birth of another, and the joy and the despair happening all at the same time. And that is a storytelling archetype forever. But we're literally watching a life begin and a life end at the exact same moment. And I thought it was very, very poignant. And so I think that's just, I really like that element of it. This episode it dovetails really interestingly with a Next Generation episode called The Offspring, which everyone else other than Mike has seen this episode, and is Data tries to create a child. And it's another one of those episodes where oh my god. So good one to watch if you need a good cry. So anyway, I think it's a really, really good episode, and certainly felt very. And I wonder, for people out there who aren't fathers or sons, whether it's going to have land quite the same way, because everyone has different types of relationships. But for me, and obviously for you, this freaking lands.
Yeah.
And continues to push Odo forward, I think, as personally, for me, one of the deepest, most complex characters on the show. And, just like, I think he's the heart and soul of the show. I really do.
I was gonna say I waffle if we were to put favorites, right? Sometimes Quark's my favorite. Sometimes, like, as recently as earlier today, Kira was my favorite. After last week, I was like, Kira's my favorite.
I know.
Cisco is always a favorite.
Right.
But then after today, I was like, I don't know that there's anything better than Odo. So.
Well, I think each of the characters play a different part, of forming the person that is the show.
Yeah.
And like Cisco's the dad, and
give me your number, and then there's another. I have a question for you.
All right. So my number. This gets a full 95 for me.
Okay, that's great.
It's freaking great. IMDb 7.8, so it is a 58 out of 173 episodes.
Okay. My implicit bias probably informs my high rating, but yeah, whatever. So,
everyone's bias is making that one happen. While he's coughing, next week we're doing For the Uniform. Okay, now your question.
Okay, my question. So, let me just table set. So I totally did not see the ending swaparoo, right? I didn't see them giving Odo his powers back, and I think it was a great way to do it. I thought it was really affecting. It made total sense. I bought it, the sci-fi of it, the sort of ambiguity of we don't really know everything about the Founders. It was mute when he flew, and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Loved it. Question though,
yes,
was he human long enough? Did the grand arc of the story benefit from making him human? Did we need to give him his power back? Not giving any spoilers with how that's potentially used in the forward. Just like as a choice, do you think they were pressured to bring him back? Did we think he was? Would there have been anything? Just like what's your view on that? Because right now I'm like, my feeling would be, well, I think they think that storytelling wise, moving forward in the grand scheme, we're going to need him to have his powers back. Or do you think they were just like, yeah, people don't love him as a human, we should bring him, we should revert?
I think it's neither. I would imagine, and they talked about the practicalities of it's too expensive to have a morph, that kind of stuff. I think if I would imagine that Ira Stephen Bear, who's show running at this point, this is part of Odo's larger arc and journey. This is the moment where our hero is humbled. Superman loses his powers in Superman 3.
Or 3, right.
Or 2, yeah. And so I think this is about breaking Odo so that we can repair him with a new context. I think it's about giving him a new perspective on his powers. And his his relationship with his changelingdom is his kind of defining character arc. And what better storytelling opportunity to have him experience not having them, to have him experience his being a solid, being human. I think pushes his character arc forward, his story, his emotional story. Now, of course, I'm not going to give any spoilers about like where this leads in the big picture of stuff, but I don't think it was like, oh, we miss Odo in the gooing or whatever. I think it's part of his emotional journey. Maybe that's me giving them too much credit, but I think that's what it is for me.
But I mentioned that because we got a comment on the watch along that just came in, and I'll read it because I think it's interesting. A person who opposes the CCP says, very moving, well-written episode. My main misgiving is the flaw with a lot of 90s Trek. The status quo is God. New characters die or leave. If a character gets a disability, or a new power, or loses a power, they will revert to normal fairly soon.
Regression to the mean. Yeah, I think that is a fair complaint about 90s Trek, that the reversion to the mean, getting us back to home base, is obviously a Trek trope, and that's a very basic thing. I think in this case, I think this might be more one of the exceptions. this wasn't a single episode arc. It wasn't like Odo turned into a transparent, Geordi turned into a transparent alien. By the end of the episode, everything's fine, right? I think this is part of Odo's larger journey.
I would tend to agree with and I don't know where we're going, but all of it felt earned. Nothing felt cheap about it, and that usually is a good indicator that it worked as a narrative.
Yeah. All right. Well, lots to think about. Really enjoyed this discussion. Really enjoyed this episode. Excited to talk about next week for the uniform. If you haven't already, give this a like. Give it a subscribe. Make a comment. It helps other people find us. If you're listening to the audio-only podcast, leave a rating and review. Helps other people find us. That's what we want. We just want to build our community. You can join our Patreon at patreon.com/KNM. We will see you back here next week with another episode of Keith and Mike Watch Deep Space Nine. Thank you for watching KNM Entertainment. If you enjoyed our particular brand of nonsense, please like and subscribe. Or become one of our patrons at patreon.com/KNM.
Hey, Shakar, get the hell out of here. We don't like you, and you're wasting good
You're wasting good va. All right, so what word were you thinking you were going to start with that starts with va?
You're so soft and round and gooey. Make your form. Find your